Speaker. Now help me enthusiastically welcome tonight's speaker, Rob.
Thanks, Ben.
Enjoy yourself.
All right. Thank you, Rob Alcoholic. And this is the second meeting in a row here where I haven't been able to contribute to the seventh tradition. I feel like I'm stealing. Anyway, it's good to be here, and thank you, Craig, for introducing us to this meeting, and Mike for asking us to speak, or me to speak tonight. And it's been cool to come up here to Prescott and get to know the Alcoholics Anonymous community. We've been escaping the heat, and we've stumbled into some really good meetings up here, really good AA meetings up here. I fell in love with alcohol. By the time I was 13, I think I was spiritually bankrupt already. I had already had a brush with religion. I was playing football with some of the kids in the street, and one of them said, "Hey, want to go to church with us on Sunday?" And I thought, sure. So they picked me up. We were 8 years old, and they were wearing uniforms all of a sudden. And we get to their church, and we're sitting in a room, and the teacher starts asking me questions out of this book that I didn't know what it was. And I said, "I don't know." And another question, "I don't know." Another question, "I don't know." And finally, my buddy raises his hand and said, "Do I get points for bringing him?" And I thought, this is the last time you're going to ever see my rear end in this, again. And I had kind of lumped all religions into that crap, into that stuff. And but by the time I was 13, I was one of those kids that was, low self-esteem, whatever. But I was the one that was the little guy that would do the dangerous thing that everybody dared to do. But I knew that there was just something wrong, and I found alcohol, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I jumped over our fence and went into my neighbors would leave town to go to somewhere in the summertime, but they had a refrigerator in their backyard, and I knew he had some beers in there, and so I jumped over the fence, and he had one warm Coors can of beer in his refrigerator, and I drank it. I thought, are you kidding me? Why does anybody do this? But it was about shortly after that I found that I got a chance to drink a cold beer, and I got hooked. Several of them, and I knew from that point on I was going to do this as much as I possibly could. That feeling we get when we take a drink, and whew, this is the answer I've been searching for. I didn't even know I had missed it. I didn't know that I was bankrupt. I didn't know that I knew there was something that wasn't right, and I felt like I just didn't get the directions that everybody else got. And in our classrooms, they'd have that little sliver of window, and I would stare out at the basketball court or the football field, and that's where I'd want to be. But I did not want to be inside the classroom. I had no interest in what was going on in the room, other than getting out of there. And anyway, so that's how once I found alcohol at 13, I did it as often as I could. I ended up all the high school stuff in South Scottsdale. The money was north of Scottsdale, but we grew up south of Scottsdale. I grew up south of Scottsdale, south of Camelback. The money was north of Camelback, and it was just it was a good neighborhood to grow up in, and my friends' parents knew me, knew my parents. You couldn't get into too much trouble, but we did a lot of drinking, and there was a lot of pool parties and a lot of that stuff. And I will say that a week before my senior year began, we thought we'd try out for the golf team, and we were heading out to Fountain Hills, and I had never driven this direction before, and so a bunch of kids, the bus showed up, the passenger van showed up to take everybody out there, and there was way too many kids in golf clubs, so I had my mom's car, so I thought, well, hell, I'll just drive, right? And one of the three kids that I had gone to school with from kindergarten on jumped in the car, and we were going to head out there, and one of them knew the way to get there. And so we started heading out, and he said, "Run this stop sign." So I slowed down to about 3 or 4 miles an hour, and I went through a stop sign. He said, "Run this next stop sign." And so I slowed down to about 5 miles an hour, and went through the stop sign. And we get to the next stop sign, and I went through it, and we were T-boned. And I crawled out of the car, and I remember being at Scottsdale Memorial Hospital and hearing the helicopter land, and his twin brother and family walking by the screen, the other side of the screen, and I knew them, and I just knew my life was going to change from that point on. I just knew there was something really wrong with this world, that I was still alive and he wasn't. And alcohol carried me through some really dark times and some real issues in life. And it was shortly after that I that accident made the papers in Scottsdale. It was the one that stopped schools, actually forced schools to have to drive the kids to sporting events. It was going to happen sooner or later anyway, but that my accident was the one that was the impetus for that. So anyway, I went to, it was time for me to leave, and I will say my senior year in high school was a blur. I got drunk as often as I could, and I started sneaking it into the house, and inside the, we had these little airplane bottles. We'd sneak them in the gym bag or the golf bag, and I just liked knowing they were there. I didn't drink every day, but I knew that if I had a really tough day, I'd go in and I'd crack open those bottles and I'd be okay. It was my medicine. And so it was October of that senior year that on Indian School in Scottsdale Road, there were 4 services, the recruiters, and I knew I wasn't going to go to college, and I knew I had to leave. It was way too sheltered of an environment for me. So I went in and I walked into the Marines recruiters, and they were, "Hey, how you doing?" And whoa, easy, relax, I walked in, and so I listened to them for a few minutes, and I went to the Army recruiter, and they stayed in one place way too long, and they did a lot of grunt work. They crawled around an awful lot, and the Air Force was way too clean, and the Coast Guard was too small. And so the one left was the Navy, and I walked in, I thought I smelled alcohol on one of their breasts, the recruiter's breasts, and I thought, this is what I'll do, I'll just join the Navy. They had a reputation for working hard and playing hard and drinking. And, all the services drink, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to join the one that had the reputation for drinking hard. And so I ended up in the service. It was 1984, and I joined the Navy, and off I went. And I ended up in Charleston, South Carolina. And after 4 years in the Navy, I will say that the only thing I really got out of the service, I got a good conduct medal and honorable discharge. I framed that and I used it to cut lines of cocaine on. But I was really, I hated authority. I saw the way they promoted people in the service, and of course I didn't approve of it. And what a joke it was. One time when we were underway on the mid-watch, everybody on watch from midnight to 4 a.m. was on acid that I gave them on LSD. It was the only thing they couldn't test on a piss test. So the guy steering the ship was on acid that I gave him. The guy changing speeds was on acid. The quartermaster charting the path of the ship was on acid. Everybody except for the officer in charge. And I just like getting away with stuff. And tell me what the rules are so I can bend them as much as I possibly can and have as much fun as I can until I'm gone. And I had already known that life was a joke. So after 4 years, I got out and I got a job with a big company. And I'll fast forward real quick. Shortly after that, by the time I was 26, I had my 3rd DUI. I had been pulled over, 8 to 10 times maybe, and slapped on the wrist or let go or whatever the case may be. But the 3rd DUI was the clincher, and I knew what was going to happen. I had seen friends of mine, I'd seen their brothers go to prison before for DUIs, and I knew that where I was going to go wasn't harsh. It was not something out of a movie. It was really relaxed. They called it Disneyland of prison, and so I wasn't afraid to get locked up. But I remember it was the night before I went away, I was holding the Budweiser bottle up saying, "God, I'm going to miss you. How am I going to live without you for 6 months?" And that was the last drink I ever took. I didn't intend on it being the last drink. I didn't want to get sober. I had no idea about really what happened in Alcoholics Anonymous. From the time I was 16 to 26, somebody was always saying, "This is what's wrong with you. You need to quit drinking." Usually their solution for me not drinking was either antabuse, treatment, or religion. I got threatened with that quite a lot too, quite a bit. And but when someone tells an alcoholic not to drink, they may as well have been telling me not to breathe. It just wasn't going to happen. So I turned into a bobblehead, say, sure, of course, yeah, I can do that, with no intention of doing anything, just ending that conversation as quickly as possible with as minor serious issue to deal with after that as possible. And so anyway, I ended up the night before I got locked up, I held that Budweiser bottle up saying, "God, I'm going to miss you. How am I going to live without you for 6 months?" And one of the other things I got out of the Navy was I was pretty competitive. And my buddy from Georgia, who was he wasn't a bookworm, he wasn't really intelligent, but he had memorized the Budweiser label. And I thought, well, I can't let him one-up me. So I still remember it to this day. I haven't had a beer in 31 years, but I haven't stared at a Budweiser can or a bottle in 31 years. But it says, "This is the famous Budweiser beer. We know of no other brand produced by any other brewer which costs so much to brew and age. Our exclusive Beechwood aging produces a taste, a smoothness, and a drinkability you'll find in no other beer at any price." It says it right on the label in that flag part of it. And, part of the reason I loved the Lowenbrows, I loved the Moose Heads, I loved Guinness Stout, I had at the end of my drinking, it was gin. I loved gin. I know a lot of vodka drinkers, but gin just had that right amount. I drank a lot of tequila. Also, one time the British Navy, we were in a drinking contest, 3 of them and one of me, I'm pretty sure I was there. And but I said, since there's 3 of you, I get to choose the alcohol. And I'm an Arizona native. I know how to drink tequila and get away with it, sort of. And so I chose the tequila, and I will tell you that the United States Navy held their end up the bargain that night, and we did very well. We walked them back to their ship and had a drink on the British ship, which is legal. But that's really cool. Anyway, so I ended up in Papago unit in Douglas, Arizona, on the border between Arizona and Mexico, in a little border town, in an old hotel with barbed wire around it, and it was a DUI yard. And I ended up there, and I knew I needed to start going to meetings. I went through the Horseshoe and the main jail in Phoenix, and while I was in the main jail, I was the only one who got a visit from a PO, and my PO was a neurotic, really little Napoleonic guy, neurotic, and he cared more about his job than I cared about my life. And I knew I was in trouble. We don't want that much authority looking at us. Please give me a PO that doesn't care. I want the guy that wakes up hungover every morning, shows up to work late, smokes cigarettes until lunchtime, and then leaves and never comes back again. That's the PO I want. I don't want the guy that irons creases in his shirt to go to work in the morning and gets there an hour and a half early, looking through the list of people he has to talk to that day. But that's the PO I got. And so I knew I had to put on a show, and I figured I may as well start going to meetings while we're locked up in prison. The meetings, I will tell you, in Papago unit, we had them. We read, we would read how it works, the promises, the traditions. We'd read this, we'd read that. And for whatever time there was left in the meeting, it was just BS. Nobody knew anything about sobriety. It was just, and I was a problem in the meetings because I drink no matter what. Some of the guys in there were saying, "No, if you keep drinking, the consequences are going to get worse and worse." And you can threaten me with San Quentin tomorrow, but if you put a bottle of tequila in front of me today, I will drink it, no matter what. That's just, I'm going to end my life that way. So I was a problem, and somebody came by my room and knocked on our door. It was an old hotel. It wasn't, it was actually Papago unit on a Friday afternoon looked like a Santana concert. There were tennis balls flying over the fence at night. I mean, it was a yard that was loaded with a lot of stuff. But somebody came by my room and handed me a set of tapes, and to this day, to this very minute, I owe my life and my sobriety and everything I am and have to Joe and Charlie. They introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous and saved my life. 2 guys that fell in love with the Big Book, that knew that there's a process in the Big Book, and started going around the country every weekend, 45 weekends a year, and then they ended up going all over the world, but called the Big Book on Tape, and they laid it out. They laid out the path in the Big Book, and they showed me what Alcoholics Anonymous was. They made it very clear that the difference between the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they made it really clear what the literature's for. And it's so that I can go through it and I can have this same experience that our founders had, and I can have a spiritual experience which is going to solve my problem. And I did not know whether or not I was going to be able to follow through with this. I ended up, I got out of there, and my sobriety is February of '93, and I showed up at the Valley Alano Club on 64th Street in Thomas in Scottsdale at what became the 10:08 meeting. It was 10 o'clock at that time, and it's kind of a legendary meeting amongst the youngsters. They know of it really well. It doesn't resemble Alcoholics Anonymous much. I think they're sober when they go to that meeting. They read a couple things, but it's hijinks. But anyway, I ended up at the Alano Club, and I will say that I was amazed when I finally got around alcoholics who knew how to work the program and who were examples of what it looks like. Because I was still kind of convinced that you guys were selling, that AA was selling me a bill of goods. I was being juked somehow. I knew that there was a gimmick to this thing. I knew it couldn't be as simple as Joe and Charlie made it seem. But I started going to a lot of meetings, and in '93, the Flagstaff Roundup happened, and I caught a bus ride up there. I had asked a couple people for rides. My sponsor was going through a divorce, and he wasn't going, and so I ended up calling Greyhound and got a Greyhound bus ride up to Flagstaff. And I was amazed. That weekend, there were probably 3,000 people at that roundup, and 1,500 of us were camping. My home group, the Valley Alano Club, had probably 50, 60 tents. I sat around campfires, drinking coffee, telling dirty jokes, laughing a lot. The speakers blew me away. I saw one girl in my home group going to 2 different tents that night, and I knew that, okay, good, we're not saints. We're not, and I found out early on in Alcoholics Anonymous that it's not our virtue that holds us together. It's the fact that our vices will kill us if we don't stay together. And I watched my buddies that would rather stand outside the meeting smoking a cigarette, talking, trash, rather than go in the meeting, get there, before the meeting starts, be there when the meeting happens, and be there at the end of the meeting. And I knew that there was something happening in this thing. And I watched them, my friends, not make it, not come back. A couple of them would die. Some of them would get locked up again. And I knew in the book when it says that, the things that are going to happen to us if we keep drinking, there's 3 things. We're either going to die, we're going to go to jail, or we're going to go insane. And there's not a lot of that insanity anymore. There's a lot of death and a lot of jail. And I saw it. And so I knew I needed to do what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I got busy, and I'm really grateful for that. I've started chairing meetings and getting involved and doing the service work of, I'm convinced that sobriety is not a bystander sport. This is not a thing where I can come in and sit in the dugout and get the results of playing in the game. I've got to get into the game. I've got to become a part of. And really, being a part of is actually kind of fun. We're a load. I have a buddy at Grand Sponsor. He showed up when I was a few years sober, and he said he liked to hang out with circus people. And when he came into Alcoholics Anonymous, he wasn't sure that he could hang with us. And he said, we're as crazy as any of the circus people he used to hang out with. So there's a lot of liveliness and a lot of love and understanding in Alcoholics Anonymous as well. And so getting busy and taking the steps and going through the process of admitting that defeat inside, knowing that alcohol owned me, and it owned me from almost the beginning. But there is a certain point in my life where I knew that I thought I was going to die at 28, like Jim Janis and Jimmy. Now everybody knows that there's a 27 club, but maybe I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. But I thought for some reason I was going to go at 28, and here I am, 26 years old, and and I found it was a lot of fun. And, I had spent a lot of time in Rocky Point prior to getting sober. All my arrests, you'd think they were all in Scottsdale. I got an open container one time in Tempe. I should say anywhere I lived for longer than 2 weeks, I got arrested. It was all really, it was very, routine stuff. It was just a slap on the wrist, a fine, going about your way. Until the 3 DUIs, the felony DUI was a problem. But those 3 DUIs all happened in Scottsdale. If I could have just stayed out of Scottsdale, I'd have been okay. But for some reason, I couldn't do it. And so I would end up losing my license. I never, before I got sober, had a license, registration, and insurance at the same time. I was always running from one appointment to the other to keep something going. I had a lot of balls in the air. I was always broke, but I always found enough money, scraped together enough money, and the fact that I had a job helped a lot, but I was always found enough to drink, but I never seemed to be able to plan ahead and pay rent ahead or do anything. I was out of control, really. And I ended up a couple times a month we'd go to Mexico. I'm the type of person who would go to lunch on Friday afternoon and somebody would say, hey, let's go to Tijuana, or let's go to Rocky Point tonight. And by 5:30 we'd be in Rocky Point, because it was a lot better idea than going back to work. And there's times I had to actually call in sick from JJ's Cantina, leaving an answering message on the answering machine at work, and on Sunday nights knowing I wasn't going to be back in time. So in 1993, there was a roundup in Roosevelt Lake. And that roundup was only supposed to have, between 800 and 1,000 people. But because of the speakers, who they were that weekend, the fact that it seemed like every alcoholic that was sober in Arizona went to it. There were 3,500 people at the roundup at Roosevelt Lake. It was such a zoo and such a cluster, such a mess. There was emergency vehicles couldn't get in and out if they had to. I mean, that's a lot of vehicles to park in a place that could only hold 800 people. So anyway, they were kicked out of Roosevelt Lake, and some of the old timers and the people that were sober from the North Scottsdale and from the Valley Alano Club that were really running the roundup thought, well, let's move it to Rocky Point. And so I got involved in it, and here I am in Rocky Point, I'm doing coffee and sodas at the Playa Bonita Hotel, and the Rocky Point Roundup Service Work in Alcoholics Anonymous changed my life. I got to know a lot of the Southern California sobriety. It got me plugged in. It taught me what I can do for work. I know that I'm really good on committees. I had no idea. If I had to fill out a questionnaire when I was 25 about what my skills and aptitudes were, I would not have known. I know how to drink. I know how to do a lot of other stuff too. But as far as what I can bring to the table for work, I had no idea. But Rocky Point Roundup changed my life. The year I chaired it, I asked Dr. Paul to speak, and Max, and we had Danny T down there, and I felt like I was walking on air. We had the bar, the cantina, where the marathon meetings were. The hotel stopped serving alcohol while we were there that weekend. It was great on the Playa Bonita. There was a cutout where the waiters would hand the food to the bartender to give to the people in the cantina. And I walked behind that cutout and I saw 75 people sitting in a marathon meeting. And I know that I had just given a year of my life to something like that. And I lost it. I stood there just crying out of gratitude. I was still, that event and events like it have altered my view of Alcoholics Anonymous and life and sobriety. I have always loved the idea of spiritual growth. I've loved the idea of spirituality. I listened to a lot of people talk about needing a higher power early on, but I struggled with the concept of God for a while. And I had adopted certain things that I thought were pretty cool early on, but I hadn't quite made a jump yet. And I know that when I heard things early on, that AA kind of opened the door. It lowered the bar so that I could actually get across it. They said that religion's for people who are afraid of hell, and spirituality's for people who've been there. And I thought, boy, I knew what that meant. They also said that AA won't open up the gates of heaven and let you in, but it will open up the gates of hell and let you out. And yeah, these are things I can get next to, but the next drink could kill you, or you have to find Jesus right now, or you're going to drink again. I couldn't get there. And, and one of the best things about our process in Alcoholics Anonymous and the Big Book is that nobody told me what God had to be. They said you need to find one, and they said, and the literature says, where and how are we to find this power? And the whole book is about helping us find the power, the process. And it says deep down inside every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God, and it can only be obscured by pomp, calamity, or worship of other things, but it's there. And then there's another sentence in there, and it says, age-old demonstration of these miracles in people's lives are as facts as old as man himself. And we were watching, eventually my wife came along. She will come along if you stay sober and you stay active in Alcoholics Anonymous, if that's what you want. But she came along. Well, we were watching Unsolved Mysteries, and there was one episode in there where they were talking about two twins. One was on the East Coast, one was on the West Coast. And the twin on the East Coast cut his hand, and the twin on the West Coast was looking at his hand. He went like this, and he picked up the phone and called his brother and said, something wrong, and so there's a link that happens between people, and I don't, to my knowledge, science has never figured out what that link is. There's a love and an energy that happens in these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've experienced that from the very beginning. But that age-old demonstrations is facts as old as man himself. The story that I've always clung to whenever I've needed to build a faith or a concept or lean on some sort of a force and a power and an energy is the story of the mother whose child is trapped under a car. There's these, I know they're true. I've heard it over and over again. There's no way that all of those stories could be. So she is not physically capable of lifting 3,500 pounds to save her child's life. She's not physically capable of doing it. But for some reason, the moment that kid's trapped under that car, she's able to tap into an energy and a force and a strength and a power greater than herself, and able to pull the car off and save the kid's life. And so I know that the book says these facts, these miracles are as old as man himself. And so I don't have to look too far. I just have to look. And I don't have to look too deep. I just have to uncover and get rid of the stuff that blocks me. And I'm so grateful for Joe and Charlie doing these things, and the 6th and 7th step, for allowing me to walk from the guy I was when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous into something that's really good, or something that's different and something that's better. I've done some research and looked around, and I've still never seen a fellowship that's as accommodating, that puts as much time and energy into the new people as we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. We devote a lot of time and attention. Congratulations on all the chip getters. I've met a lot of people that have forgotten that they have more days than years, and they've relied on their years to keep them sober. And some of them have actually come back and gotten newcomer chips because of it. So I have to do today what I did when I was newly sober in 93, 94, 95. But I want to, and I also want to keep getting the experiences that I've had. In 91, I was drinking in San Diego. We were really good at singing the national anthem. We were very patriotic. I still am, but we were very patriotic, and we did a really good rendition of the national anthem. And on July 4th, we happened to be in San Diego, my buddies and I, and we were singing Jack Murphy Stadium. After every inning, we'd sing the national anthem, and we'd get applause. I mean, almost standing ovations from the 50 or so people around us that heard us. And we did it because we could drink for free as well. I mean, people buy you drinks when you're really patriotic in a bar like that. It was right after Roseanne Barr made a mockery of the national anthem. She grabbed her crotch and spit, and so they were really uppity in San Diego at the time. In fact, security was after the third time they told us to knock it off. After the 5th or 6th time of singing the national anthem, they finally took us, handcuffed us, took us below the stadium in a cage, got our information, had the cops come and take us away from Jack Murphy Stadium, and we ended up back at the hotel, and we're drinking, and we've been drinking a lot. So my buddy got into an argument with the bar owner at the hotel, and the same cops that drove us from Jack Murphy Stadium to the hotel showed up to pick us up. And this time there was no humor. They couldn't see the humor in it and the irony. They took us to the airport, and we were put on the plane, and we were told never to come back to California again. That clearly. So in 90, I got sober in 93. In 1995, there was a convention, an international convention in San Diego, and I went and defied the order to not go back to California ever again. But I was sober at this, in a couple of years, 2.5 years. And I remember I was in Jack Murphy Stadium, the same place I had been handcuffed before. But there were 70,000 alcoholics in there. And we were saying the Lord's Prayer, and we were saying the Serenity Prayer, and counting out how it works. And I just, there wasn't a dry eye in the stadium. And I was amazed. and I've been blown away by Alcoholics Anonymous ever since. She came along when we were 3 years sober. She was in a relationship, so I had to let it run its course. At 5 years sober, the relationship ended. I had two really good female friends. They were also two really good friends of my wife's. And they knew how I felt about her, and they also knew how she felt about me. And this is maybe the only time in the history of mankind that neither of those women ever said anything to either of us about it. But at one Friday night, one of the girls whispered in my ear, "Hey, Pam finally broke up with her boyfriend." So Sunday night, after a speaker meeting, we all went back to Denny's, and everybody went home except for she. She and I stayed until 7 a.m. talking that night. And a couple days later, we went out on a date, and we've been together ever since. We don't. Alcoholics Anonymous, there are people in AA that know how to date. I was not one of them. I wasn't around people that knew how to. We just tend to move into whoever has the better living conditions, a better house, so anyway, we've been together ever since. We got married at 8 years sober, and we've been married for 23 years, and it's been pretty cool. At 5 years sober, I went back to school. I'm a very poor test taker. I do not take tests very well at all. And I found an actual college that will give you credit for performing instead of testing. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So I went to the University of Phonics, U of F, University of Phoenix, and I got a degree from him, and it was pretty neat. Some of the guys were transferred over from ASU, and they swear by they thought it was a pretty good education in the University of Phoenix. But anyway, so I graduated. I finally ended up going, and there were some successes that came along with sobriety. When I was 5 years sober, the job I lost when I went to prison called me up and asked me to come back to work. And I thought, "You want to hire me back?" And he said, his words were, "Tuesday through Thursday, you were a pretty good employee." And he said, "We'd like to have that guy back, and I know you're not drinking anymore." But I had the felonies, and I thought that those would be a problem, the felony DUI. And I remember talking to my sponsor about it, and I said, Tony, I said, "I don't know, man." He said, "It's none of your business. You do the footwork and leave the results up to God. Your life is no longer your business, Just do the footwork." And so on Monday morning, I showed up. I filled out the application. When it says, "Have you ever been convicted of a felony?" I left it blank, and I put DUI in a big circle right there. And and that Saturday morning, right after that, I showed up to play AA softball. It was sober softball. It was before the Sober Softball League started. The Valley Alano Club was beating the North Scottsdale Fellowship at softball twice. This is the third week, the third game, and so we were undefeated. But I showed up early to play softball, and I was just there to have a good time. And there was a newcomer sitting on the bench in the dugout, and I walked up to him, and he had just come to my home group the night before, and I stuck out. I said, "Hey, Dale, do you have phone numbers of people?" The same questions we would ask any newcomer. Do you have phone numbers? Are you getting some sleep? Are you getting meals? Are having solid bowel movements yet? That all the stuff that we ask the newcomers. And finally, I stuck out my hand and introduced myself to the guy sitting next to him, and he was kind of hunched over and had his head down. He looked up and he said, "I knew who you were from the moment you walked up." And he had been a former VP at the company who had to sign off on some project work years before, who knew who I was. But he knew what had happened to me when I went away. His very best friend in life, a guy he talked to every day and hung out with, was the director of corporate security who had to approve my rehire. He was also the newcomer's older brother, and he was there to see what sober softball was like with his younger brother. And I would not have been able to get hired back had it not been for that. I did not plan on making anything happen. I just showed up to have a good time. And so much of Alcoholics Anonymous and so much of life is just showing up. And if I can bring a good attitude towards it, things just seem to work themselves out so much better than I can plan. And, when I stayed back there, I was 29 years sober, and I retired from Motorola, and have been retired for 3 years now. And so that's why we get to come up here during the week, and have a good time and kind of chase stuff around and follow Craig all over the country and other places. And I love life. And I will say that the process of going through the steps has the miracle of it has never left me. There's some things about the way AA came together that are so beautiful and so powerful. I know that AA number 7 or AA number 9, the guy they credit with "as we understand him," and how powerful is that nobody tells us what God is. he was a problem early on, and I say that he was number 7 or number 9. They don't know which, but he went on a 12-step call while they were still part of the Oxford groups, and we only really had the 6 tenets of the Oxford groups at the time. He went on a 12-step call. It was for a woman. There was nobody he could take with him. There was no female sober. He went on it. She ended up getting sober. They got married, and they stayed married for the rest of their lives, and they moved to Southern California in San Diego, and they hosted Bill Wilson's mother for Thanksgiving and Christmas every year for the last few years of her life. You know, so who says that these things that happen in early sobriety with alcoholics, you know, I'm a firm believer that God has held us together and saved us from ourselves, much the way he saved me from myself and you newcomers and everybody else in here from ourselves. There's a lot of defeat and a lot of what comes from it, like the phoenix rising from the ashes. There's a lot of, we're some of the luckiest people in the world that we get to live 2 different lives. The first one, I ran into the ground and I was going to die. The second one, I get a chance to live on this side with you guys, laughing and joking all the way through. I laughed and joked with alcoholics and addicts before I got sober, so hanging out with you guys on this side is so much better. And I have to give a shout out to Prescott Alcoholics Anonymous. I had still had survivor's guilt and shame. I was still having a hard time at 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. were my bewitching hours. I'd still wake up and be the self-pity, the pride, you know, the guilt and that shame was still so strong. You know, I was about 3 years sober, and a guy named Dave Smith from Prescott. I had the pleasure and luxury of talking with him one-on-one after a men's stag went away. And I had asked Dave, I said, Dave, I don't know. He said, hey, kid, what are you holding on to? What are you struggling with? What do you need help with? And that was just how he approached it. And I said, well, because Dave knew I loved the book. He knew I knew the process for going through the book. I said, I can't let go of the shame and guilt. And we talked a little bit, and he told me, he said, Rob, I don't know how you're going to be able to get, I don't know exactly the scenario behind it, but I can tell you this, it probably is going to have something to do with steps 8 and 9. It's probably going to have something to do with some sort of an amends process. And I had already taken the letter to the graveside at the high school. We planted the tree, and I read the letter and asked God to deliver it as he saw fit, and tore the letter up. I had already done the thing with the family as best I could. They didn't want me. My grandmother went over there. You know, but I had done the things that I know to do in steps 8 and 9. You know, and I still wasn't able to let go of it. And when Dave told me that, I thought, well, I trusted him. I knew he had a lot of street cred around the 64th Street Alano Club, you know, I knew a lot of the people that he had sponsored and were heroes of mine as well. So I filed it away, and I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And when I was about 8 years sober, a guy that was about 65, and when I was 8 years sober, I was 33, 34. A guy who's 65 asked me to sponsor him, and I thought, there's really no reason we should be going through the steps together. You should be finding somebody with gray hair. Anyway, I sponsored him, and in his story, he had run over a cop in a construction zone. And when he had maimed that cop and stopped him from being able to perform his job. And I helped him walk through those amends. When he made amends to that officer and his family, there was something that happened, because a few days later I woke up and I no longer had the shame and the guilt, and it was just gone. So when Smith told me, he said it's going to be around steps 8 and 9, he was accurate. He's right on money. I have never been lied to in Alcoholics Anonymous about take these spiritual actions and you're going to get some results. I have never found a place that gives us the opportunity to take these actions and get these results this way. You know, and I'm amazed at how beautiful the process is that comes together, that teaches us to meditate and to pray. And, you know, and to this day, I still don't have a lot of people coming up to me saying, Rob, what's your concept of God? But I do have people come up and we talk about the process to get close to this power. And the more I learn about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, the more I realize that what we have here is so special, and it didn't come from us. what we have here has been given to us by a lot of different places. The Oxford groups, Dr. Silkworth, a psychiatrist in Switzerland, that told an alcoholic he has to have a spiritual experience, and I'm convinced that my spiritual malady, I was spiritually addicted to alcohol. I have to have a spiritual solution to it. And I am so grateful that no matter what our denomination, our religion, whatever our beliefs are, we can come together and we can stay together this way on this side. My wife and I were we were 8 or 9 years sober. We had moved into a condo that appreciated and sold it, bought a house. We moved into this house together, our first home. It was on a quarter acre cul-de-sac lot. We kept expecting the adults to come home and tell us we have to leave. We were just enjoying life. There was a lot of animals at the house, alcoholics over all the time. And I had been a GSR, and for some reason, my name and phone number had been at the top of the list in Arizona. And in this GSR manual, the service manual that nobody ever reads or got or whatever. But our phone rang one day, and I answered the phone, and my wife, she's going to share next month, but she had her bottom was in Ocean Beach, and her story, I'll let her tell her story, but her bottom was in Ocean Beach, and it was a big part of her, her life, our lives sober. And I get this call one day, and I asked this guy, and he's coming out from San Diego, and he needs to find Alcoholics Anonymous. And I asked him what his home group was. He told me his home group, and I said, well, hold on a second, bud. You've got to tell my wife what your home group is. And I handed her the phone, and her bottom was at the end. She tried to throw herself off the end of Ocean Beach Pier, and she woke up the next morning with a daily reflections next to her saying, it doesn't have to be like this anymore. And so here we are 8 years later, and she and I have been sober about the same time. She's 4 months behind me, which is a big deal, really a big deal. But I don't talk about it. But the phone rang, and this guy and he had to tell her. He told her what his home group was. His home group was the 8 a.m. daily reflections meeting at the end of Ocean Beach Pier, and I just watched her face just change, and she just started bawling right there, 5 feet from me, just crying, just out of the. We don't get here from where we came from. People like us die. The only difference is I had some willingness, and I wanted to do something a different way, and I found you guys, and I believed you when you said, if you laugh and joke and show up, your life will change. If you have a good time with this thing and don't make life in sobriety miserable, and then that's and that's about it. I know that my belief in a power greater than myself is so much a part of me now. And I've been doing this a long time. I don't want to turn my back on it. And I have seen a lot of people that are 30 years sober, 40 years sober, stop telling on themselves and rely on the past, rely on the time that they've been sober and the change that's taken place to keep them sober today. And there's a bitterness that can happen, and I don't want to be one of those guys. I read A New Pair of Glasses when I was first sober, before I even read A 12 and 12. And that book altered everything about sobriety for me. I really recommend it. And I showed up for work for free and for fun. And I show up to Alcoholics Anonymous and to see what I can add to. And really, that's kind of the 11th step prayer. What can I bring to the table in the party instead of what can I take from it? And so I love you guys. What a cool place to have a meeting, and I'm a grateful alcoholic. And with that, I'll pass. Thanks.